Others? Anyone else? Yes?
So my question pertains to a point you made about the underlying media system that the social practice rests on. And you mentioned, and I wasn't quite sure if you were speaking of this as the ideal that you would hope for, or that we need to defend, or something like that, but you were saying every web page is equidistant. And given what we know now about the algorithms that search engines use, the search engine optimization that everyone else uses,
Right.
and also some insidious things like those two things combining, people who have political agendas. The thing I was most recently reading about is supremacists, white supremacists, sneaking their stuff in so that other people aren't quite aware of where something comes from on the internet.
Right.
Were you speaking of this equidistance as the ideal we need to defend, or were you thinking maybe this too will pass and it really will be equidistant? It seems like that media system is also in quite a bit of disrupted state.
Okay, great question. It's neither. So the question is, when I said every web page is available to every equidistant from every user, every address is equidistant from every other address, was I describing what it should be like? Was this a naive description of what I think it is like? What kind of statement is that? And it's a statement of an abstract property built into the web. Okay. So it's a statement about the stack. And when Timothy Berners-Lee was designing the World Wide Web, one of the abstract properties he built into it was that every page on that would be available to every other page. Okay. Now, we don't operate that web, right? Because many layers are built on top of that until we get to the actual user. And of course, there are all kinds of ways in which we are prevented from getting to every page on the web, or steered to, and this is where search comes in, some pages more than others. And so the abstract equality that I spoke about at the level of the system, right, or the level of code, as Larry Lessig calls it, that's why he wrote a whole book on code, is the abstract property of the system determines everything else that can happen above that step, right? And many other things come into play too, like search engines and their biases and gates and barriers and all. Okay, so we have to keep both of those things in mind. That property was built into the system, but a lot of things eroded. However, it's still there, right? When your student decides to run their assignment as a blog post at their blog, everybody on the web can reach that post. Right? That is not an abstract thing. That is a fact of internet life. And so this is where I think understanding the present situation is tricky. You always have to know what level of the stack you're on. Other questions?
I've got one, actually, since I'm holding the microphone anyway. We're looking at this, obviously, from a level of abstraction as people who study the press and journalism and the media, although many of us are also journalists. But how much, when you're teaching undergraduates or master's students who are going to be journalists, how much of this situation and their own level in the stack do you think a practicing reporter needs to be aware of?
Well, a practicing reporter certainly needs to be aware of my deliverable. That sentence that I think sketches out what's happening. They need to understand that complex of forces and what brought it into being. In the students that I teach most now, in my graduate program, Studio 20, which is focused on innovation in journalism, they have to master this whole thing. I mean, the talk that I just gave you is, for them, a price of admission to what I'm teaching them, and to what they want to do, which is to solve this unsolved problem, right? Figure out what kind of enterprise can sustain serious journalism after the digital disruption and play a part in the enormous creativity that is released by a challenge like that. So they really have to know it all. But they're choosing to study with me in this particular program. For most journalism students, I think they have to understand how journalism got into this situation, why things like cost cutting are happening, you know, and otherwise, if they don't know enough to know why these things are happening, what happens is they become victims. They feel like victims. They feel like people are taking their livelihood away, and that it's sort of personal, but it's not. It's just like forces bigger than ourselves are at work, right? And there's a lot of, as I said, destruction and misery in there. But you have to know why that's happening, because it's not because people all of a sudden decided you're not worth anything in journalism, we don't need anymore. That never happened.
So,
Hi.
Hi. So you've deconstructed the system, and you have three elements. You have the press and journalism. Is there value in a fourth, which is the market, and to being able to understand the market in some way, and what are the ways that the press and journalism specifically can be funded? The way it has been historically, people are now pushing for greater nonprofits, but we see the nonprofits still struggling to find a model that works. So, you know, Chicago News Cooperative and
Right.
whatnot. Is there value in actually having that fourth element of deconstruction? Because to not have it in there, where that is a major part of the problem, I guess, yeah.
Yes, so the question would be, back through here, like, why isn't a fourth factor, right, the market? It's a good question. And I think, like, the way I see it is the market is threaded through all three of those things. Like, if you look at our underlying media system, the wires, the pipes, the platforms, the means that make it possible for the whole communications complex to exist, we look at that system. Part of it is government, right? A lot of it is owned by giant companies. And then as we get closer and closer to the delivery, what they call in the cable industry the last mile, which is the mile from the trunk to your home, right? Then it gets, new companies come into play there. And the market is completely threaded through the media system, literally from the ground up. And in the social practice of journalism, much of it takes place within the market because people are working for companies, right? And they're in a labor market, and their work has to sell on an open market. And it's not that I'm unaware of that or don't want to look at that. It's that it's not my job to make that the only reality for journalism, because it's not. There's also a way of producing quality journalism in non-market conditions. That's what, for example, Frontline is. And in lots of different categories of journalism, the top practitioners, the people who do it the best, are not operating under market conditions. Some are, many are not. So there's market, there's also state-funded, which is BBC is somewhat, you could argue, is state-funded, right? So it's not that I don't want to give the market its due. The market gets more than its due in each one of these things, but I don't think of the social practice of journalism as defined by or limited by what the market will support at any one time, because we have these other ways of doing it. We should be strengthening those as well. So that's how I'm coming at this. The press is very much a product of what the market would sustain at any given point in its history. that's what it is. But it's also larger than that. We have traditions that surpass market conditions. We have narratives like mission statements that go beyond what any given market we have. We have ideals of journalism that are really important. We have what I call press think. That's why I study press think, because it transcends market conditions. So the press has to survive in the market, but it is also something that is larger than the market. Like journalism schools, we have part of the press as well. And the digital disruptions that I talked about are large enough that they are disrupting that institution as well. When you have a key foundation like the Knight Foundation and Eric Newton, a key official of that foundation, propose a teaching hospital model of journalism school and recommend that existing schools change what they're doing into more of a teaching hospital model, that's major change, right, in an institution going on because of the same changes underlying media system that I talked about in my talk. Any other questions before we move on?
We've probably got time for one more.
One more?
There's one.
Okay. Nope. Thank you very much.